Good afternoon, dear friends. The Moscow Urban Forum continues its work. My name is Angelina Davidova. I'm the environmental journalist, editor, magazine Environment and Law, observer of the UN climate negotiations. And I'm going to discuss the green agenda, climate strategies of superstar cities. And also, we are going to dwell upon how leaders just to show very interesting stories as to minimizing the CO2 emissions. How do they adapt to the new conditions? Climate change, climate strategies, and integration of climate into social plans for urban development tend to be more topical. And climate becomes a key driver of the urban development, as in the cities and towns of the globe and Russia as well. And we express it here at the Moscow Urban Forum. And the experts from Russia and other cities and towns of the world are going to discuss it all together with us as to how integrate the climate change into the green agenda at the level of adaptation, at the level of GHG emissions. We're going to dwell upon the story of Singapore, Oslo, Moscow, and other areas. And thus, we're going to understand what are those technologies, what are those approaches we may undertake, what are the challenges we face and supposed to address in the future. And we've been on a regular basis reviewing the situation with the global climate change. And the experts of the UN and the experts of the WHO assess the climatic risks money-wise and with due regard to the harm to the cities and towns. And also we have to dwell upon the adverse effect on the environment and health. And the WHO representative is going to dwell upon that. And we have the waves of heat. Even in Moscow, in the Nordic city, we've experienced that particular flows. We also know how precipitations do change the nature of the weather, flooding, and droughts, and the landscape of risks is changing. And out of the blue, we are witnessing this or that threat in various cities and towns of the world, and how those new climatic risks in the megacities have to be dealt with, and how do we attribute it to healthcare and climatic strategies in particular. And in the coming an hour and a half, we're going to discuss it all together jointly with the experts of the forum, and we're supposed to do it on a real-time basis. And Anton Kulbachevsky, good afternoon. He is the head of Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Department of Moscow. Anton, the floor is yours. And on a real-time basis, we have Nicolas Bouchot. He is the president of Grand Paris Alliance for Metropolitan Development, and plus Urban 20. And that is a G20 division fully in charge of the urban development and integration of climate agenda and strategies into the further development of cities and towns of the world. Nicolas, thank you for coming. And in the online mode, we're supposed to have quite a number of international experts. I would like to introduce them. Milita Vainovich, head World Health Organization, Russian Federation.
Jennifer
Lenhardt, global lead to WWF cities.
Esteban
Leon, Chief Technological Advisor of City Resilience Profiling Program, UN Habitat. Heidi Sorensen, Director of Climate Agency, City of Oslo.
Gerhard Schmidt,
Former Director, Singapore ETH Center, Professor Emeritus ATH Zurich.
Ну что, друзья?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to the subject matter of our discussion, which is a really heated, which arises heated debates, and Moscow and Oslo are experiencing the waves of heat, and the problems of heat become very painstaking for us. And the first speaker today is given to Esteban Leon, Chief Technological Advisor for City Resilience Profiling Program UN Habitat. We're talking about the climate change strategy, minimizing the GHG, adaptation for cities and towns. It becomes really indispensable. What are the key challenges we do face, and how do megacities respond to that, and which requirements the cities and towns are coming to you with, to the UN Habitat? How can we help them?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you. I think this is a very important topic, especially in times where we've been for the last year and a half discussing about COVID, and probably that has been the emergency in the latest months, almost 2 years now. But let's not forget what's the important objective in future, which is climate change, which is definitely the most challenging, the largest challenge, I would say, that the world will face in the next decades. So I would like to just start with some kind of conceptual thinking, and I think that it will be good for all of us to start considering that the world is urbanizing at a very rapid scale. We have passed already in 2015. We have passed already the 50-50 line between urban and rural. We know that the world is more urban now, and this is a trend that is not going to change, definitely. We know that the urbanization process is here to stay, and it's a very simple reason. The reason is that the population is growing, clearly. 50 years ago, we were almost 2 billion people in the world. Now we are getting to 8 billion people in the world. And while the population is increasing, the world is not expanding. So it's as simple as that. It's just logic. It's mathematics, right? If you keep adding water into a glass that does not expand, at some point the glass will be full. And this is what is happening. And well, I mean, this is the reason why you can see that cities are growing at a very rapid speed, and this is not coming together with the capacities to have people settle in safe and non-risky areas. In fact, what we can see is that the world is urbanizing at a speed in which we don't have the capacity, and most people are sitting in risky areas. Add to that the effects of climate change and the new hazards that we will have, and you have a perfect recipe for a disaster, right? If you consider that the sea level is rising, if you consider that most cities are growing, and if you consider that many cities will be losing some space due to the high level rise of the sea, then clearly either we start thinking in how to develop cities in a more sustainable and resilient way, or we are going to be clearly doomed in future. And that's the whole rationale for us to start working on this, which is a pressing matter. The other point that I want to raise to you is that we can concentrate on the challenge, we can concentrate on the hazard, but my advice will be to concentrate more on the cities. How do we make sure that our cities are adaptable to what's coming? I have to apologize because I have my camera on one side and my monitor in another. I don't know if I should see you or I should see the camera. It's quite strange. So going back to the cities and urban systems, if we can develop cities that are resilient, that are waterproof, that are in a sustainable manner growing, then we will most likely be less affected by the impact of climate change. I'm not saying that we are not going to be. We are going to be, because this is a fact. But at least if we prepare our cities to be more prepared, we are going to have more chances to survive this change. And that's the rationale of UN Habitat's approach as well. You asked me, how can we help UN Habitat? I would say, how can we help ourselves? How can we make sure that our cities are developed in a sustainable manner? How can we make sure that we are conscious of what's coming? And how can we make sure that we are conscious of what we should do to change this trend? One is sustainability. The other is to make sure that we don't emit so many gases, that we make sure that we don't waste resources, that we make sure that we maximize our resources, and that we make sure that cities are developed for people and taking care of the planet. Hopefully we will have less cars going around and less non-survival, let's say, items to live in this world. And well, I mean, I must say, I'm proud of working for UN Habitat, because we have been working on that line, trying to make sure that cities are sustainable, trying to make sure that cities are resilient, and trying to take this urban systems approach, which makes sure that the cities are safe and sound to whatever comes in future. As I said, COVID has been one of the main challenges in the last year, a year and a half. We are coming to a second year, but we don't have to forget, and we don't have to forget what's important just because we have something that is urgent. The COVID crisis is urgent, yes. We are having some health problems all over the world. We are having also some socioeconomic problems that are, due to this COVID-19 and the response. But let's keep our eye on the north, which is what is it going to happen with this climate change impact? And we have two ways of dealing with it. Clearly, mitigation and adaptation. And from the point of view of cities, I have to emphasize and advocate for us as city leaders, as city managers, and as citizens of this world to make sure that we make our best to try to change that trend. I thank you very much again for giving me the floor, and it has been a real pleasure to be here with all of you, and I'm looking forward to your interventions and to listen at how do you think we should keep working on that with that objective. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Esteban. Действительно,
Thank you, Esteban. Thank you for summarizing and generalizing the global climate agenda. And you've highlighted the climate change, the risk, the sustainable development of the cities and towns. These are the key priorities of the 21st century, probably of the next century as well. And they have to be perceived appropriately at the level of the UN, administrations of various cities and towns, and at the sovereign level. Talking about the climate change, we are talking about the climate risks. And it could be the urban infrastructure, transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and those networks which make our life comfortable. But they might be under the great climatic risk, posing danger and threat to the citizens and for our future and health. And the climate issues are tied up to the healthcare system. And Milita Vainovich, the head World Health Organization, Russian Federation, is the next speaker. How do you assess climate risks? How often cities and towns address you with regard to their anticipations and and climate change emergencies, and what needs to be done at the level of cities and towns as to minimize the climatic load onto the health of the population.
Thank you so much. Let me, as we are discussing a specific topic, I will still stick to English.
Poses huge risks to human health and well-being, and the best way we can see it is monitoring the premature deaths from increased respiratory and cardiovascular diseases, from increased injuries, which are related to extreme weather events, but also to increased air pollution. Poor air quality related also to climate change is the #1 cause of premature death from environmental factors in Europe, and it has considerable economic impacts. Some of the health effects, such as the incidence of asthma, may also be affected, climate change related, because we are having an increase in exposure to ground level ozone. Of course, climate change is also affecting vectors, and vector-borne diseases outbreaks are likely to increase because the vectors become more established and their habitat extends into cities as a result of climate change, urban sprawl, and other factors. And of course, as you said, higher population density. It is increasing the population at risk in urban areas. It is limiting the urban heat island effects, which is critically important to prevent excessive mortality that we are seeing in relation to such areas, to such events. You have mentioned the 1 week ago unusual heat wave in Moscow, but Moscow is not the most northern city. I mean, you have seen the same in a number of cities which are even more north than Moscow. Let me just mention one more in Russia, it is St. Petersburg. So these enormously high temperatures and the heat islands are actually something that are critical. There are two main priorities that you have actually mentioned. Mitigation, to reduce the greenhouse emissions, because we do know that the cities are both the victim of climate change, but also the contributor. And let me just remind us all that up to 76% of global energy release is energy-related greenhouse gas emission is actually linked to cities. And also cities are producing $62 trillion, which is 85% of global GDP. So one is related to the others, and human health is actually a resource for both development and economic progress. One does not go without the other. If we are looking at the moment at the European region, we have the 53 European member states, including Russia, who have committed to implement the Paris Climate Agreement and to reduce the gas emissions. So we hope that if the region can really work together, and I said cities are critical in this one, we could reduce by 26% by 2030 the global gas emissions. But what is the role of urban nature in protecting from weather extremes is actually something that we can concretely do. And this is where our Department for Environment and Health in Bonn is actually working with many cities across Europe, including with Moscow. One of the effective measures that can be taken is that in dense and artificial urban environments, it is important to ensure access to natural areas and the local availability of blue and green spaces. And these are relevant and critical features for quality of life, for health and well-being. If we are looking at the burden of disease, of course, we know traditionally it is the respiratory and cardiovascular disease and injuries, but it is mental health related to all these diseases and mental health per se in urban settings and in the environment that is suffering as well. And this is a direct investment into improving both the quality of life, but directly contributing to improving mental health as well. Urban planning and sustainable transport policies, another area which is outside of the health system and health sector, but has a critical importance for health, because this can promote health, reduce pollution, and support actions to address climate change and make cities more inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. If we manage to reduce the number of cars, the number of people individually using cars in every city, and use at least part of their day to include 45 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes of walking, not on these electro scooters that we are seeing now everywhere. Yes, they will partly reduce the pollution, but they are using energy, and this energy is produced somewhere where it's also greenhouse emission. Walking, cycling, two basic things integrated in cities. And we are seeing fantastic examples. Of course, Moscow is a star city. But let me mention another small star that I'm aware of, Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, which has used all the instruments that WHO is offering to calculate the economic benefits and the co-benefits for health by introducing as much as possible cycling in the part of the year when it is possible, of course, but also looking at other innovative options. So all policy sectors, both national and local governments, and down to the lowest level, and in Moscow, I would say to the rayon level, it is very important to jointly consider and communicate internally and externally the links between nature, biodiversity, and health, incorporate nature, environment, and health considerations into all policies at both national and local levels, and seek no regret and nature-based solutions to societal, economic, environmental, and climate challenges. These are standing problems. We want progress. What does progress mean? We want a nice life. We want to live better, easier, with quality. But that requires our individual action in every moment. And let me just briefly mention COVID-19, because there have been a lot of confusions about how COVID has brought an environmental relief. And indeed, climate change may indirectly be affected by the COVID-19 response, as it undermines environmental determinants of health and places additional stress on health systems. I'm not going to mention again our health workers working in the costumes, even in a very cool area. And can you imagine what it was on +30?
Мелита, извините, пожалуйста, у нас, к сожалению, ограничено время.
I'm sorry, but we have very much a limited agenda. So please, could you wrap it up very briefly? Thank you so much. Sorry for that.
I'd like to finish on one. Any short-term environmental benefit as a result of COVID-19, for example, the decreased air pollution due to lockdowns, come at an unacceptable human and economic cost, and are no substitute for planned and sustainable action on air quality and climate. So at the moment, we fight the climate change and COVID-19 together to prevent lockdowns, but have clean blue sky and clean air. Thank you so much.
Спасибо. Спасибо большое, Мелита.
Thank you, Melita. Indeed, you have represented the major risks that the climate change brings about for citizens' lives and health. And for some very specific ideas and proposals, you mentioned those nature-based solutions and the green or green-blue infrastructure of the cities, decarbonization of vehicles. All these recipes we have at hand. The issue is to try and integrate them in the city's urbanistic development plans, and which way to go to more effectively implement it. My next question goes to Jennifer, your new World Wildlife Foundation in the division that's called WWF Cities, and you're in charge of those solutions to adapt to the climate change and the solutions to strengthen the life sustainability of the cities. So both the climate effect and sociological effect, what are the impacts considering all the economic and social factors? So what is your recommendation, please?
Good morning to you all. I'm going to share my screen if this is okay. I wonder if you can see it. Let me just go ahead and make it full screen for you. And I am joining you from Santiago de Chile. I can tell you here, I keep hearing about all of the heat wave.
Sorry, Jennifer. Sorry. Now we have your presentation on the screen. Thank you.
Excellent. Good morning to you all from Santiago de Chile, where I can stare out my window here at very snowy mountains. We just had a recent snowfall. So hearing about all the heat waves that are happening in Europe and North America puts a little bit of a context into where we are right now in our cold winter. But certainly these challenges are global and we are seeing them all over. And so maybe a question to start off with to you is, why would WWF, an organization so known for nature conservation, start to care about cities? Well, as my colleagues from both the World Health Organization and UN Habitat have already shared, cities matter in terms of where our population is, where emissions are happening, 70% of carbon emissions, 75% of natural resource consumption, which is certainly a number that is very important to WWF, but also many of the opportunities that we see in our cities as well today. So 10 years ago today, we started something called the One Planet City Challenge. And this One Planet City Challenge is really a space to galvanize and connect cities to show that they are spaces of solution, but they also need to really have the right plans and policy and actions in place in order to do so. And so we start with data. We know that if we want to measure where cities are now, this is very important for knowing where they're going. So to date, we've had 600 cities from some 50 countries join our One Planet City Challenge, and we do this in partnership. We know that there are great organizations out there working with cities, including ICLE and CDP, that have recently joined forces on their city data reporting platform. We've also been inspired by C40 and their work with aligning cities to the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 degree target, because when we talk about adaptation in cities, we know the first adaptation is effective mitigation measures so that we can really focus on where we need to go and really push towards alignment to the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming target. So it's really, we start with data and we align the questions we are asking of cities to what the Global Covenant of Mayors is also asking, so that we make it as easy as possible for cities to really get the advice from different third-party organizations to work in this direction. And this year, we're also very excited to be part of the Cities Race to Zero, which is a big campaign to get some 1,000 cities aligned to the Paris Agreement by the time we get to the climate conference in Glasgow in November of this year. And we're also very happy to say that our method of assessing to see how closely cities are is recognized by the Cities Race to Zero, as well as the Science Based Targets Network, to really give cities a strong push in these marks. We provide advice, and we do so through a cycle, I should say. So the first cycle where we are right now, so we open this up to cities in Russia and across the world in order to submit your data on this joint reporting platform run by CDP and ICLE. Then we will assess that data to see how close your cities are aligned to 1.5. Then we bring cities together in an expert jury with World Health Organization, with UN Habitat, and with others, so many experts around the world, to really see which are the strongest cities at both the national and the global level. And then we celebrate them because we know that we need to really demonstrate that there are robust, strong cities working on adaptation and on mitigation, and that it is possible to really meet the climate targets that we have set forth for us. So when joining the One Planet City Challenge, or the OPCC as we call it, we really want to recognize strong cities and show what is possible both at the national level and at the global level, and provoke learning between cities. We provide this strategic feedback on how closely a city's particular plans and actions are to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and what can be done in order to help push cities towards that mark. And again, as mentioned, we do so in partnership. We know that WWF is not alone on this, but there are a lot of great city actors that we want to work with. And finally, I want to also mention the importance, and this is, I think, a really important part for WWF, the importance of public engagement. We have a campaign which we run in the finalist cities, up to 3 finalists per country, that is joining the One Planet City Challenge. And we call it We Love Cities. And why do we call it We Love Cities? Because first, people need to know and love where they live if they want to create the right changes and the robust visions that we need in our cities to really move, as was stated, to see the linkage between health and nature-based solutions and climate action. So last year, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I'm very proud to say that we were able to get 1.2 million global votes, citizens in these cities that are really reflecting and galvanizing change in their cities. We gathered almost 80,000 citizen suggestions in order to improve upon their city and what their cities are doing, how their cities could be better. These are suggestions from citizens to their mayors. We had more than 4.6 million public engagements on social media. This is where WWF or the cities were promoting their work in order to really show citizens what is happening out there. And we had the wonderful city of Batangas in the Philippines that won this campaign last year, really going out and having their mayor very actively engaged in this campaign in order to show what is possible, planting trees, picking up trash, also, sharing information online, as many of us were locked in our homes for much of last year. So in closing, I just want to share a few final examples of what WWF is doing also. We have a platform called the Urban Solutions for a Living Planet, where we profile cities that have joined the One Planet City Challenge. And I invite you to look there and see what other cities around the world are doing to show, as we say at WWF, that together it is possible to create change. And right now we're really moving to start to think, wake up, how do we plan our cities? And we've seen this a lot. I want to focus on also on what the WHO has also mentioned about connecting air pollution. We've been very inspired by their work, and we want to wake people up on how they get to the office. So we took global data to look, how many people are dying every 30 minutes from air pollution. How far could we get in that same amount of time? 12 kilometers, and we could do so on a bicycle. So why do we need to get in the car when we can actually move around our cities in a healthy way for ourselves and also a healthier way for our planet? So I'm going to end on this image here because I know we're short on time, but we need to recreate how we envision our cities. They don't have to be places of concrete. They can be places for people, they can be places for nature, and they can be places for healthier communities. Thank you.
Спасибо. Спасибо большое, Jennifer. Действительно, мне показалось...
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It did seem very important to me that you have offered very specific models of cooperation between cities for sustainable development, reducing the load on the environment, on the climate system, to strengthen, to support their livability and adaptation to climatic change. It's programs like these that allow the cities to cooperate, exchange best practices, to tell each other what has succeeded and what has failed. It seems the most effective, efficient way of sustainable development of the world as a whole. Well, to proceed, my next question goes to Anton Kuzbachevsky. We have heard this global assessment from the UN personnel, the assessment of climatic risks, WHO, WWF. They've told us how the cities of the world cooperate already now and trying to do something together, aside from exchanging practices. How the climate issues are critical for the Moscow city, and how are they being integrated now into social, political, economic development of the city? And how do you see it in general? How much the climatic agenda is affecting the situation? In fact, it was only 30 years ago that the scientists and agricultural experts have started to evaluate climate change. Back in 2019, there were 7 major climatic collapses, and the price of adaptation and the damage was evaluated in over $10 billion. And those occurrences have become more frequent. Forest fires in the US, floods in India, etc., etc. You remember the 2010 heat wave. In our city, 22 historical temperature records were broken. So that heat wave has just stopped 3 days ago. There were some temperature records recorded as well. So Moscowites by now understand that the climate is changing fast. And a number of events like ice rains heavy storms, low temperatures, passages over zero. That has become a frequent occurrence here. So the annual report of the World Economic Forum says 2020 climatic risks have become #1. Could you please speak up? Oh, yes. We will all benefit from that. So, the first place in 21 is back to technological risks being #1 instead of climate, but for the last 5 years, the climate risks have been leading the rating. So if we now go to CDP, the economists said that by the year 25, the cost of subsidizing measures or damage compensation will exceed $1 trillion, which is a lot. So this is damage to the world economy. So climatic risk entails some actions, 2 actions like adaptation of the city economy and the reduction of risks, reduction of impacts of greenhouse. The adaptation efforts we started some 5-6 years ago for all the branches of economy. We have calculated and estimated what industries exactly are more susceptible, and we estimated the price of adaptation measures, the cost actually. So the money that will be channeled for rehab measures, for damage control, mitigation, that mostly goes for transportation, power production, roads, heavy construction, greenery. So those areas and industries were identified the priorities, and we are actually advancing here. So one of the key industries is transportation, public transportation. So there's damage to road surface, higher hazards of road accidents. We have achieved a lot here, with our main priorities being improving the winter snow collection, snow and ice collection, which in Moscow has become a continuous effort, and then reconstruction and upgrading the hard surface roads. So the damages from storms and the damage to the trees and the bushes, and definitely with the heat waves, there's attacks by some pests, some diseases and illnesses that we never faced before, that are a great damage to our green environment. And many adaptation measures also that is being implemented successfully, that have been approved and confirmed on different red tape levels. So all these compensation will have guaranteed financing, which is important. Well, in public health, risks are emerging because of high temperature. We had 10 days of the heat wave. All the city services have performed properly, so there were no serious signals of people dying directly of heat. We didn't get that, meaning that the city services have their own patterns to follow, like they did in 2013, because the heat waves of 2010 taught us a lot. So now with those events recurring, we have experience behind us. So the heat of 2010, Muscovites remember, there was great impact on the city infrastructure. The citizens felt the damage. In 2019, that was recurring week after week, but nobody was actually complaining, so that the city system has adapted to that. Well, different regions of Russia respond differently. Climatic risks are there, but for major supercities, main risks are, of course, is the public health. As the previous speakers noted, the key measures are fighting heat wave, providing ready support, security for trees falling, and overall territorial development approach, so there's better accessibility over the green areas. So this year we're going to renew our climatic plan, so we will readapt certain city urban industries. We'll be selecting new technologies with the total culmination to reduce carbon footprint. Moscow is the only Russian city part of the C40 group. So the climatic agenda for the third year in a row is a key issue there in the agenda of the Urban 20. For example, Paris has undertaken the obligation to reduce the exhaust by 40%. 24 to 30 years, London by 60% compared to 90. So neutrality they would like to reach by the year 50. In Moscow we share this general direction, but we are a northern super city, and by the year 50 we will probably not become neutral by that, but we will exert a lot of effort. So the Moscow territory has increased 2.5 times, so the real estate has increased respectively, but we are reducing the exhaust level, and there are prospects for more, and we have reserves and experience to keep moving that way. Well, something to add. In the year 2020, we were included in the risk category called A in the CDP assessment rating, which is another proof that our efforts have been noted internationally. And we are proud of the fact, like Melita mentioned, the role and contribution of the natural ecosystems is evaluated and coordinated properly. 37% of the older Moscow is natural bio-locations, biotopical neighborhood. We are probably the only megacity of the world that has this status of protected territories with a over total prohibition for any activities. So we have virgin forests, we have virgin swamps and the like. So we have added 2,000 more hectares of territories like this, so from 17 to 19,000 square kilometers. 8 more will be added this year. So we're fully supporting this overall challenge. We're moving the right way, and we're looking to the future with optimism. I would like to thank all the guests that were able to come and join us and support us in this effort.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anton, for the presentation of some specific actions of the government of Moscow in the climate change policy and emissions mitigation and adaptation to climatic risks, and some specific actions of Moscow are conjugated and harmonized with other cities and towns of the globe. And Moscow is U20 members, 40, and take part in CDP ratings and for companies and for cities. And the next presenter is Nicola, who is here with us. And Nicola, you are an expert of U20 in terms of infrastructure and climate change, and these are different cities and towns with various types of climates, a social demographic background, social economic development level. What aligns them, and what are the key climate change priorities of those cities and towns? Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Angelina. It's a pleasure to be here today, reminding me also of a previous edition, not of the Moscow Urban Forum, but of the Climate Forum of Moscow a few years ago. Now we are in a different situation, one with an immediate pressing sanitary situation with the COVID-19 crisis. And somehow this pushes the need for new ways to partner internally within a city, but with the public and private sectors, citizens, businesses, and research, but also to partner in a different way on the global stage. There is, I would say, an understanding that what we have done in the past is not sufficient, and this is somehow a critique. We have to understand, all of us, how much ill-prepared we have been for this COVID-19 crisis, and how much we should learn from this COVID crisis in terms of knowledge making and interface between knowledge making and policy making. You were right, Angelina, to mention the Urban 20, that is the group of cities of the G20, right? There are many groups in the G20. There are a group of think tanks, group for youth, group for women, group for science, group for long-term investors. The Urban 20 has been created only a few years ago. Last year, in the context of the pandemic, we had started to work. And I remember a meeting in Riyadh with representatives of Anton's administration, and then there was a COVID and everything was disrupted, right? And after some hesitation, we went online. And we decided that we needed to move on, right? But then there are questions about where to move on. It's not just a question of how to move on or innovate. It's about understanding how the pandemic is affecting our collective ability to respond to shared challenges locally and globally, which includes climate, and climate within also the choices of development, such as the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations. I will not comment on that, but the more you get into specific partnership organization, the more complex it becomes. But you have to be aware of those different bits and pieces of the puzzle. So this is an illustration from the interconnectivity between the different sets of issues and stakeholders from last year. But the U20, the Urban 20 of this year, which is being co-chaired by Rome and by Milano, and we had the forum of our organization last week with the Sherpa of Rome joining us online as of today, is a good illustration of, I would say, how much we need to be able to be partnership fluent, if I can say so. Understanding that partnerships alone are useless, like communication campaigns alone are useless. They have to be driven by a purpose. And the agreement about this purpose is certainly not easy to reach. However, what we can see is that the COVID-19 crisis has only highlighted, because we had maybe more time to look around us and understand the magnitude of the environmental transformations which are taking place, that it is not possible just to retreat. It is not just possible to find solutions city by city, and the interdependencies within a given space or among different cities are more important and meaningful. Therefore, the level of interconnection, institutionally speaking, between cities, let's say subnational governments and national governments, in the context, for example, of a huge forum such as the G20, is something also very new, which was not shown us there. This year, under the G20 presidency of Italy, there is a lot about subnational governments and circular economy and climate finance and biodiversity, and we can see that this is emerging, but there is a way forward for this, but it will require dedication. And I think places or superstar cities such as Moscow, who have been involved since the beginning in this Urban 20, do have a role to play. That's adding even more responsibility, because this means addressing the needs of the citizens locally, but that's also building on the talents, on the capacity building, on the human resources of Moscow and other cities to cooperate together and to be able to address change at an even wider scale. Last comment would be on the need to work across intersections. That's a little bit of a different concept and topic, but we have been exploring that through dialogues, and I'm happy to see Jennifer Lennart here, who was part of the experts, and you can see that it is about several factors all at the same time, with the issue of health and society, prosperity in communities, fragmentation of knowledge, inclusion and distribution, system solutions and agendas, this makes it all the more necessary to go beyond our zones of comfort, but also to understand, this will be my final point, how much the current situation linked with the COVID-19 is weighing on us, physically, mentally. We have to be aware that this is consuming a lot of the capital that we have been building over the past decades, and that we have also probably to build on each other, to trust each other, to build solutions for the future, because we will have to cope with other crises. And the climate one is sort of a long-term horizon, but we can see that it is also among us. So partnerships, recovery, intersecting are interesting ways to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you for the Urban 20 introduction and highlighting the key priorities in the sphere of climate. And I think you aptly mentioned intersectoral work. These are various sectors, various challenges we are facing, and finally, they are put together. And quite a number of solutions are applicable to the cities and towns, and those factors have to be taken into account. Thank you for the representation of your work. And we, within the framework of Urban 20 associations, would like to view various cases vis-à-vis regions and cities of the globe. Gerhard Schmidt, for quite a long time, has been working in Singapore. He was at the head of the project Cooling Singapore. He tried to work as to how minimize the adverse effect of the heat for such a densely populated state as Singapore, and to make the lifestyle better and to minimize the negative implications of the climate change. Herbert, what kind of takeaways you may highlight as to Cooling Singapore? Is it applicable to other cities and towns, and what are the conclusions of this project?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me, and welcome from Switzerland, where I'm at the moment. Is it okay with the sound and the view?
Да, мы можем вас слышать, все хорошо.
Thank you. Yes, these questions are quite loaded, and I try to answer them one by one, and in the wrap-up in a few minutes, you will see, hopefully, some answers. Today, we're talking about superstar cities, and we have seen that even for superstar cities, it is not enough to be sustainable, not even to be resilient, but it's very important to be regenerative for the future. Let me lay that out a little bit. Today, a superstar city has many, or has to have many qualities if it is really working for its people. It has to have clean air, clean water, high thermal outdoor comfort, less noise, calmness, affordability, livability, diversity, creativity, clean industry, renewable energy, circular economy. And even if it has all of these things, it's not guaranteed that it will increase the quality of the city over what it had before. So that means the regenerative quality of the city is very important for the future. Focusing on a city that is very dense, as you said in the introduction, and thank you again, which is Singapore. Let's have a look at the qualities that Singapore is working on very much at the moment. These are the qualities that are blue and green. And in specifically cooling Singapore, because the heat and the humidity in Singapore is a big problem, we can see in blue what Singapore is focusing on. And I'm talking about the Singapore ETH Center and the Cooling Singapore project are working on these specific blue parts that you can see here. That means on outdoor thermal comfort, to increase the outdoor thermal comfort, to increase the livability, to make proposals for clean industry and renewable energy. And these are all areas that the city is very supportive of and wants to increase its impact in the future. These cities like Singapore, all the cities in the tropics, they are exposed to harsh and aggressive climate. But we have to work on that. We come from seeing the climate as an enemy to become a friend. By the way, all the images that I'm showing, they really have been already, they're underway. So in the past, Singapore has tried to use and work with the climate by building specific architecture in the specific tropical environment. But of course, that was at much less density. At this time, maybe there were 200, 300 people per square kilometer in Singapore. Today, it's more than 7,000 people in Singapore. And when Anton was talking about the area around Moscow that has been reserved for protected areas of 17,000 square kilometers, I just calculated quickly, that would mean with the density of Singapore that almost 120 million people could live in these protected areas, which of course is not intended. Today, Singapore is looking like this. It has succeeded, I would say, in making the harsh climate partly its friend, in that it has separated the city and has put the whole city in a garden, or has put a huge garden in the whole city, as its founder Lee Kuan Yew has asked for. And you can see this interplay between buildings and garden and jungle is working quite well. Mitigation and adaptation, we heard about this a lot, but we think it is very important that we give science a much bigger role in that in the future. In Singapore, in our Future Cities Laboratory, we have the motto, it's called Through Science, by Design, in Place, over Time. And therefore, science is in the beginning, and it is very important. This is how it looks like in the end in Singapore. It's an aerial view from the center, and you can see, of course, the streets. You can see some of the nature that was there before, the trees here, but you can already see very important things for a hot climate, like district cooling plants, like active energy generating devices on the roofs, like photovoltaic and so on. So this is very important to have also in science places to show what can be done so that it can be applied to larger areas in the city. It is also important that to become resilient or even sustainable, and then further on regenerative, citizens and cities must work together, and therefore governance is really, really key. And I showed that in my last talk for the Moscow Open Forum, the citizen design science, where science and citizens work together to make better environment. Here, this example from Florence, but also from Singapore, with very high-tech means now, with computer engaging the population with interactive tools to improve particular areas of the city, like here, Tanjung Pagar area, where the harbor is today. Also, we have to work with the urban climate by regenerating and by accelerating regeneration. How could that look like? If you could drive through Singapore today, in many places, it looks like that, and you don't even see the buildings. You can see roughly the buildings here in the background, like here and here, but there are many places which are very, very green. And if you get closer, it is almost like we saw before, that image in Vienna or wherever it was, where the streets were suddenly becoming green. In many places in Singapore, this has already happened, and it's contributing to the better microclimatic conditions. Very important, as also mentioned before, the decarbonization, but generally the detoxification of the city. And that means to improve the urban metabolism. We have now a good understanding of the urban metabolism, what goes in, what comes out, but this has to be really detoxified. And if you see situations like that, this is not Singapore, this is Los Angeles, but here we can see the transportation system and how the housing is sitting in between. Not a very attractive situation, I would say, for the people living there. Of course, many function as shopping, some industry and transportation together. But for every city, we have to have an understanding what that means in terms of carbonization or decarbonization and detoxification. This is the image of Singapore, where the so-called Sankey diagram shows what is coming into the city in terms of energy and pollution on the left, and how it is used in industry. And if you can see transportation, for example, from the previous slide here, if we would succeed in detoxifying or decarbonizing transportation totally, that would already reduce quite a bit the load on the air, on the heat of the city. And if you go on to industry, that would be even more. Of course, every city has its own Sankey diagram, and therefore we build digital urban climate twins for every city. Finally, 2 points, very important, I think, for the future. We have to incentivize the regenerative business. That means businesses and little firms, big firm, medium enterprises, huge enterprises that are able to take existing technology and new technology and make cities better than before. So that goes only through information and through nudging. I just give two simple examples. This is something we did in Switzerland, in the Alps at 3,000 meters high, using wood as a very simple building material to make the first totally autonomous building of Switzerland more than 10 years ago in the Alps at this altitude. And another example from Germany, which you recently finished, a building that is producing 3 times as much energy as it needs through summer and winter, and transportation included with electric cars. And it's not even more expensive than normal buildings that can be built. That means if we inform and nudge business, young business, new business, into building buildings like that, it will be very, very beneficial for that. Finally, planning regenerative cities for the future, we need citizens plus nature plus science. The citizens, when we educate them, they are going to help a lot. This is the citizen science and citizen design science. They can support us. The science here helps us to simulate future scenarios. These are real scenarios, in this case from Singapore. You see the real case at the bottom, and you see the abstractions and the scenarios for district cooling, for solar panels, for electric vehicles, combinations of those, and the impact of the heat, of the urban heat island, the positive impact of the heat island of Singapore, meaning cooling down the heat island of Singapore in the top. And of course, we have to do that together with reality and make competition and building future Singapore with proposals like that from my colleague Kees Christians and KCIP, who made this winning proposal for one part of Singapore for the future. Coming to the end, the lessons learned, first results. As mentioned before, we have built a digital urban climate twin that we can apply basically for every city. Looks very complicated, is very complicated, but it produces very clear and simple results on what to do in each city with all these different parts that make the heat island. Second, we have to bring these results into the public. I just mentioned one example here from earlier this year, when this company was doing global news and compared Singapore and looked at this Cooling Singapore project. And within a few weeks, there were more than 1.5 million downloads. Of course, the title was very smart, saying how Singapore uses science to stay cool. People thought all kind of things about this, but it had a lot of impact, so people know much more about this. And I think the most important outcome so far is that by increasing sustainability, by increasing resilience of a city and going towards regenerative parts of a city, we can make very intelligent urban heat vulnerability maps of cities to protect its people, also to tell them and let them know where to be and where not to be when these heat waves hit, to warn them before that, and this way make cities much healthier than they are now. These are the final slide. Superstar cities today, resilience is not enough. For harsh and aggressive climates, we have to go from enemies to be making them our friends. Mitigation and adaptation, science is key. Towards resilience, citizens and cities, governance is key. Working with the urban climate, accelerate regeneration, improving the urban metabolism. We have to detoxify the city, incentivizing regenerative business through information and nudging, and finally planning regenerative cities for the future. We need citizens first, we need nature and we need science. Thank you very much.
Спасибо. Спасибо.
Thank you, Herhert, for your wonderful representation of your project. It's a very striking project. I was very much interested in the level of modeling and forecast and the way you apply the model of the digital climate twin. And this experience may become absolutely indispensable for other cities and towns. Are you familiar with our other colleagues which would try to do the same model in MGU, for example, at Moscow State University? A group of experts is studying the problem of heat, the measuring or violence of heat, and the follow-up forecast of the temperature change. I think their experience will also be of great value to us. Okay, we are going forward, and from the tropical Singapore, we are moving slightly to a cool area, to the city of Oslo, and Oslo climate may be conjugated with some cities and towns of Russia. Nadia Sorensen is the head of the Climatic Agency of Oslo, and many risks of the climate are compatible with those we have in Russia. And these are the waves of heat, precipitations, entailing flooding. Heidi, what are the key issues of your climate agency? What are your key priorities, and how do you structure your work?
Thank you very much. Are you able to see my presentation?
Ваша презентация сейчас загружается.
It is being uploaded.
It's being uploaded. Thank you very much. Thank you for being able to attend to this very inspiring seminar so far.
Да, мы видим, все в порядке.
Yes, I think it's comparable to a lot.
Yeah, we can see that. That's all right.
And if I think I have to say at start that Oslo is a very big city in Norway, but globally not so very big at all. We are almost 700,000 inhabitants. Our priorities was set by the City Council last year when they adopted a very ambitious climate strategy. It is the first time that we see mitigation and adaptation integrated as one issue, and we also study how actions on both mitigation and adaptation influence each other. The ambitious targets are that we by 2030 should be almost climate neutral, and at the same time we should be climate resistant. The mayor has a dream of Oslo becoming the first climate resistant zero emission city in the world, and that is a very difficult but very important task that we are set out to solve. I will start then to talk about adaptation, and I will talk a little bit about mitigation at the end and about the climate budget, which is the key governance tool we have to have when it comes to mitigation. But first of all, climate change vulnerability. That in preparation for the strategy, we made a quite comprehensive study of the climate vulnerability. We look at all the impacts of climate change on society, but we also looked on every agency in the city and the services where they're produced, and mapped how will they be affected by the climate change that we were foreseeing. And then we add this together, and we had a very nice output to see where we have to join forces. The impacts of climate change in Oslo is, I think, as in very many other northern cities, it is storm, water, and urban flooding. It's heat waves and droughts, and warmer winters. Some may think that that's not a problem, that our very cold winters become a little bit warmer, but bear in mind, we think that might be a big problem. The storm water is seen to be the most challenging thing, and one of the things that we are facing already. We have chosen a three-step approach, which actually is quite nature-based solution. We seek solutions to manage rainwater by not putting them as we did in the old times in pipelines, but manage them on the surface and guard the water safe towards the fjord. We have three steps of that. Rain or lower intensity should be caught and infiltrated in green roofs, rain gardens and fences. A medium intensity rain is delayed and retained by rain gardens, land for temporary flooding, and open retention basins. And then we have these really extreme precipitations where we have a really heavy rain. Then we will let the water in safe floodways, in open rivers, streams, and planned waterways in the city. But if we are going to lead the water through the city, we have to know where it's going today, and we also have to find out where we want it to go in the future. Oslo has developed a city-wide map of floodways through the city. This map will play a key role in the management of stormwater in the future. Oslo has 10 rivers and creeks that run through the city. When Oslo developed and became a city, many of them were put in pipelines and totally covered. That created a lot of problem with the stormwater and flooding, but it also created a grey environment. The last 10 years, more than 10 kilometers of waterways has been opened and has given us a more resilient city, but also a nicer city, a greener and a bluer city. That is also very important. In the forest that surrounds Oslo, there used to be a lot of bogs and peat mosses and different important nature systems. That was also due to timber production that was degraded in the 50s. We have now restored more than 260 acres of bogs to be able also to withhold water, so we can more easily deal with these extreme situations. Then when it comes to warmer winters, this is our national skiing arena that is placed in the capital of Oslo. Warmer winters kind of steal away one of the things that we love most about being a Norwegian, that's skiing. And just around the city of Oslo in our forest, we maintain more than 2,600 kilometers of ski slopes. And that's a lot, and that means a lot to many. If we look upon what will happen with the expected increases by temperature of 4.5 degrees, we will lose something like 2 to 4 months of snow. Basically, there will be no more months of snow at a normal winter if that happens. That, I think, is a very strong thing for many Norwegians to be engaged, because you actually love the cold winter and you like to have the right to stay cold in the winter. One of the problems with the cold winters disappearing is that a lot of new species are able to survive in the Arctic. And we have already an increased problem with invasive species. We lose quite a lot of resources every year to control and eradicate invasive species, and that is something we look hard into, because it's extremely expensive when it happens, and it creates many things that we are not very happy about. But still, as you said in the start, both Oslo and Moscow has experienced heat waves and drought. This was unheard of 20 years ago. But after the summer of 2018, I think we learned a lesson. The areas you see on the map from 2018 should be green and are normally green, were grey in 2018. Even food production went down, and a lot of problems that we hadn't foreseen happened. I think it inspires the decision of planting 100,000 trees inside the construction zones of the city of Oslo to be able to keep the temperature low at when we have heat waves happening. Let me then say briefly about the climate budget, because as has been said before, mitigation is the first step of adaptation. We have to avoid the dangerous climate change. And what we have developed is a climate budget that we see as a very efficient governance system. It is a system integrated in the ordinary municipal budget. When the city council passes a budget every year, it's also passed the climate budget because it's integrated inside there and states what emissions reduction measures has to be done to achieve the targets. So it's our job to identify emission reductions that is needed, and we identify its cost and what unit that have to implement the measure. And then we have a reporting part that is extremely important on the budget side. We are now working on the 6th climate budget for Oslo, and we see that it has been very important in engaging all agencies in being a part of the extremely important mitigation work. That the ordinary municipal budget is reported on 3 times a year. That means that every agency has to report. Have to report on the financial situation, but also how are you proceeding on your measures to lower climate change. That is very important and makes us quick enough to adjust things if things are not happening fast enough, and then have a constant pressure on having the result fast enough. We also have developed a climate barometer that have 17 indicators, and 3 times a year we publish on our website result of that. I think I've been posing a lot of action plans on climate in my previous positions. The climate budget is something different. It's constant work as financial budgeting is. And I think that is important, that climate issues is put in the very center of the policy process, and that is when the City Council passes the budget every year. So that was a little bit about the climate budget. I will be happy to talk more about it. I will also say that the C40 organization has an office in Oslo that is more than happy to tell you more about the climate budgeting and help you if you want to start, be a part, and see if you can do climate budgeting yourself. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Heidi, for your presentation of very specific areas of your activities. It does seem that in Russia too, where we are now, the climate portraits of the cities, Moscow and Oslo, are similar in many ways. So it was important to hear what risks you take as most serious ones, and to hear about very interesting, unique experience of establishing the climate budget. Very few cities worldwide do have something like that. So this experience of developing this budget and implementation of it is, of course, extremely valuable information that we can lay hands on. Well, okay, friends, we have some time for questions. I have here some questions from our audience. That's a question to Nicolas, please. In what way could cities and global institutions and city associations cooperate in a more effective way in environmental and climate issues in the context of greater environmental risks and environment issues getting more and more acute?
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is an important question. I will just a statistic. 600 cities, which are major cities worldwide, over 1,000 cities of 500,000 inhabitants or more. How much time will it take for the Oslos of this world from one city to expand to 1,000 cities with so many differences in terms of social context, economic backgrounds, etc. We do not have the time to go from one city to one city to one city. Networking has been very useful, but networking is not sufficient to address the challenges. 50 years ago, there was this very influential report about the limits to growth, known as the Meadows report. We are living in the conditions, somehow, that were described 50 years ago. 30 years ago, there was a global agreement with environmental governance with the Rio Earth Summit. But we have come to the end of this cycle because the think global, act local was very useful when we were getting global. Now that systems are interconnected, this is not sufficient. So we have the 2030 agenda, and we think it's still an horizon, but think about where we were 10 years ago. It was the beginning of the Moscow Urban Forum. It is not a long period of time ago. So 10 years ahead of us with the acceleration of the challenges and resources challenges and biodiversity and climate is a very short period of time. Therefore, I think there is a chance in ongoing negotiations. It was mentioned COP26 about climate. There will be COP15 about biodiversity. There has been for the first time an open discussion between the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the International Panel on Climate Change a few days ago. How can cities and not just national governments or international institutions can sit at the same table to solve the problems is an issue for multilateral organizations and international relations, and probably also an opportunity for strong players to expand their influence and the solutions, moving from scaling up and experiments to new standards, new norms, also building on the diversity of city experience, but moving into more integrated standards about sustainability, which are not yet there.
Спасибо. Спасибо большое, Николя, за ваш ответ.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for your response. One more question from the audience. If the cities are just starting to discuss the climate agenda, how could they integrate the priorities of climate change into their strategies and plans and specific operation plans? What would you advise to the cities in their climate planning? So we can take a response by any of the speakers. That's a question to all of you. There are cities that have been actively involved in this agenda for the last, let's say, 16, 17 years. Take the C40. It was set up in 2006 when the 40 megacities, including Moscow, joined in the effort. And that was probably the first National Cities Association to raise serious climate challenges and started to elaborate on strategies to adapt to reduce the carbon footprint. So experience is there, expertise is there. Well, we understand the scenarios should be very similar. They could be, interchangeable. Well, so a larger city is much harder to adapt compared to a small township. But I would advise all the colleagues to carefully study the international experience, to join the cities associations that are growing anyway, like the G20, C40. They're already bringing up their criteria for size and population requirements. So it's now easier to join the association, exchange experience, take part in those international activities. There are many opportunities there, and it's actually available and accessible. Go ahead, study and act, take action. Don't just stay there. Well, our dear online speakers, anybody would like to respond how the city should start their performance on the climate, how to start and integrate the climate issues into their development plans?
Да, Esteban, пожалуйста.
Esteban, please, you're welcome.
Thank you. I think there is no options here than to start. I mean, it's not a question of when or if we should. It's a question of how and rapidly start. But most importantly, I think that what we have to think in this era is that we will face many more challenges, as I said at the beginning. Climate change is not the only one. Probably is the most important one, but it's not the only one. So when I say we have no more choice, I say that cities will have to accommodate, adapt, and become resilient to a future that is unknown. For sure, climate change is presenting heavy challenges. For sure, we all are convinced, and I think I'm preaching among converted people here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here listening at this climate change discussion. But at the same time, we have to be conscious that it's also a cities discussion. Local authorities, national authorities have to understand that there is no option rather than adapting our cities to what comes in future. Being climate change or being any other challenge, as we can see from the COVID response. One. Second, on the partnerships, I do believe that we don't have options either. It's true, we have more than, 50,000 cities in the world, around defined cities, but anyway, we are talking about 45,000 to 50,000 cities. If we are going to start working one by one, it's going to be a complete disaster. We are not going to get there. What we have is to create a massive movement for this. And what better way than in partnerships? But also partnerships have to be very much directed and objective. I was the chair of a collaboration between many organizations working on urban and climate resilience. And we did a mapping of how many cities are we working on. And it's pathetic, to be honest, and I don't want to depress you. But, counting all these organizations, C40, ICLE, UCLG, Uninhabited, UNDRR, the World Bank, the 100 Resilient Cities, Rockefeller Foundation, when you start counting all these organizations and we start mapping where they are active, we didn't find more than 200 cities in the world where we were all active. 200 cities. If we consider that we are around 50,000 cities in the world, how many cities you can see that are underserved?
Эстебан, извините, у нас, к сожалению, заканчивается время сессии.
Sorry, Esteban, your time is over.
Извините, пожалуйста.
Sorry, you have to finish up.
Yeah, I hope my point was crossed around. Let's not pick the sexy cities. Let's make sure that we support cities in need, which are all over the world, not only in developed countries, but also in developing countries. Thank you.
Спасибо. Спасибо большое за ваши ответы. Спасибо.
Thank you for your answers. Thank you for your comments. Ladies and gentlemen, we are wrapping up, and I would like to thank all the experts who were with us on a real-time format. And I would like to thank those experts from online. We had a very informative session with the discussion of the green agenda, climate risk strategies, and strategies for adaptation, and the true stories about real cities and towns of Singapore, Oslo, Moscow, to name a few. For me, it was of great value to discuss all these challenges. So stay with us and join us for other sessions. Bye-bye.